Thank you. Go ahead.
So today we have our consultants, Tanex Engineering, delivering a teleconference to discuss the regional connectivity strategy. So we have 30 minutes allotted for their presentation and then time afterwards for questions. So this was given as an attachment in the special regional council agenda. So if you have, they're going to go through the actual strategy. Throughout the process to create the strategy, we had a Northern Rockies team that consisted of myself, Mike Gilbert, and Rob Blaine. We met weekly to discuss all sorts of different things about connectivity in the region. We did a very extensive outreach towards different residents, businesses, nonprofit organizations within the region. This is where we did that survey to inform the strategy. So I'll let our consultants take it away. And if you have questions, please don't forget to use your mics and ask them. All right, thank you.
Somebody might,
right,
we're getting a
Tanex,
little bit of feedback on the phone. So we might be getting a bit of feedback from somebody's on the phone. Okay, anyways.
Better.
Okay.
So, good evening. Thanks for accommodating our need to make this a remote presentation. We were disappointed as we were very keen to come up to your area of the province and present in person, but under the circumstances, it seems like the prudent choice to do it remotely. So I hope everyone there is staying safe, and I'll just begin by introducing ourselves. We are the principals of Tanex. Mike Thomas is the professional engineer who has been doing telecommunications for just about 30 years, and my background is in law. I practiced law up until about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and have been working with Tanex since then on this kind of project work. The other key members of our team, Duncan Sharp was our project engineer, Morgan Hendry was our GIS resource, and Blake Glassford was our communications outreach survey analyst. So just to break the ice, we thought we'd start with a little bit of a funny. So Dilbert's boss says, "Good news, we won the bid to build a nationwide wireless network." And Dilbert replies, "Bad news, we don't know how to build a nationwide wireless network." Dilbert's boss says, "It's wireless, how hard could it be to not install wires?" There you go. Tanex Engineering's background, professional engineering consultants for just about 30 years. We are now located in the East Kootenays in BC, in Invermere, which is about a town of about 3,000 people. And we run our entire network engineering business from here. So connectivity remotely is something that we are very passionate about. We've done a bunch of work similar and relevant to the work that we did for you in connection with strategies and various design and commissioning projects over the years. So for tonight's agenda, we just thought we would quickly review the connectivity, discuss the project scope and framework, review our methodology, run through our report and strategy, discuss some funding opportunities, and summarize and talk about next steps forward.
We just want to check and make sure everybody can hear us okay and everything?
Yes, fine.
We're all good? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Councillor Roper on the line, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect.
Perfect.
It's working.
Good. All right. So need for connectivity. This might seem a little bit self-evident in these times that we're living in. So I won't spend a bunch of time reviewing it, but certainly in light of the current situation with COVID, meetings like these would not be possible if we didn't have good connectivity. The other thing I think it highlights is the use of connectivity for access to emergency information in real time. You know, you look around at your community and say, who doesn't need up-to-date information about COVID, although sometimes it's a little overwhelming. But in terms of the other uses of connectivity, certainly we know them well and live them daily. So in terms of project scope, this project arose out of your RFP in which you requested a regional connectivity strategy. So we were asked to develop that strategy to improve access to high-speed, affordable connectivity through the regional municipality, with a primary focus on internet connectivity, well, although the cellular service issue is certainly recognized. The RFP asked us to loosely follow the NDIT framework, which they had provided as a template. So we have done that to some degree, although we have not strictly followed the framework where it didn't make sense to do so. So the framework devised by NDIT is basically broken out into a what, why, what, and how of the strategy. So what's your vision for your region? What benefits do you think you're going to get? What are you going to do? And specifically, and then how are you going to do that? So the methodology that we used was to create a current state initially of the connectivity in your region. We started by taking a data set, GIS data set from the Northern Rockies group, and developed some maps to illustrate the current state of connectivity. That data set did not have a building location layer, so we did some extrapolation from that to devise some material to help us with density and such. As Valerie pointed out, we did outreach by survey and direct outreach by telephone. We had bi-weekly meetings with Northwest Tel.
Weekly meetings, actually.
Weekly. And they always showed up, which was great. We did a vision and strategic objectives development session, an extended remote session with key stakeholders identified by the Northern Rockies connectivity team, and we used the regional economic strategy vision as a basis from which to work. Then ultimately did the analysis and documentation of the material that we gathered and created a strategy or a plan to get from A to B by the development of 4 initiative objectives and a list of specific next steps to take. So Northern Rockies current state. This is a map of basically the cell towers, microwave towers, and existing fiber line in the region. The fiber line is Northwest Tel's, and the cell infrastructure is Bell's, and the microwave towers are mixed ownership. So when looking at the Northern Rockies, we had what we called strategy drivers, and those were specific things about your region in particular that made a difference for us in considering how to move forward. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but for us, geographically, the regional municipality is huge, and it's remote. And it has a small population. All of those make it kind of tricky from a service perspective. Because it's a regional municipality, it has a mandate to serve all of its constituents, and unlike a small town or a village incorporated municipality, where they just have an obligation to serve their citizens of that, with the broader regional municipality, it was a bigger ask. So Fort Nelson, key location for the Alaska Highway, primary commercial center. Population largely centered in Fort Nelson, but smaller communities up highway and elsewhere that require service. From a telecommunications perspective, obviously the big big driver is the issue with Northwest Tel being the only terrestrial provider with its monopoly and tariff pricings that create problems for people in being able to pay their bill. Residential satellite service available by XplorNet, commercial by InfoSat and Galaxy. Cellular service we've briefly talked about, no service west of just outside Fort Nelson, and no 911 service in the northern, in the Northern Rockies regional municipality. So just a couple of nuggets on the survey results. Couple of themes that came out. First of all, we were really pleased with the uptake on the service. The survey, people were interested and engaged in the process. They were keen to fill out the survey. You got almost 10% of residents and almost 8.5% of businesses that filled it out. Themes, internet is widely considered a vital service. Almost uniform levels, high levels of dissatisfaction with cost and choice. Some reported overage charges of over $1,000. No cellular service up highway, so internet connectivity is even more important. There was widespread support for improvement to connectivity. And there was a very, very small number of respondents who actually actively disagreed with the idea of public funds to support improved connectivity. So I thought that was interesting. The relationship that exists between Northwest Tel and its customers in the Northern Rockies is very strained. That was almost universal across the board, that people are not very happy with Northwest Tel as a provider. So that's basically the public survey results from internet or from residents and businesses. Stakeholder feedback, that was a direct outreach by phone to identified key stakeholders that were listed out by the Northern Rockies team. We called and had a list of questions that we addressed with them, and the themes that we got, again, cost, service reliability, negative impact on business, the monopoly, the caps. We discussed, we talked to a couple of nonprofit nonprofits providing services to the community, and there was a big, it was very clear that there was issues with the connectivity and how it impacted their ability to provide the services that were part of their mandate. You see the picture off to the right there, which is from the Literacy Society, where, it's highlighted and, almost bolded and underlined, saying no streaming, no downloading. And, that creates an environment where people coming in to use the Society services are limited in being able to do that. The First Nations pointed out additional issues with respect to accessing justice resources. Sorry? Okay.
Carry on.
Educational health services, very clear issue with the access to 911 and no cell service. People are worried about that. They're upset that there's the public safety issues arising out of that. Businesses report impacts on lack of connectivity and having to constantly try to manage their customers' expectations with respect to that. First Nation members incurring expensive monthly costs of $500 to $1,000 and limited access to ongoing adult education. That's sort of the nuts of what the feedback was there. So that sort of takes us through our little blurb on the as-is state, and the next section that we're going to talk about is kind of the Broadband 101, which Mike will take over as the technical resource and give a little lesson on broadband.
I'll just pause here for a sec to make sure everybody can still hear us and we haven't gotten disconnected or.
No, everything was good.
Everything's good. Okay, excellent. Okay, so a little bit of Broadband 101. Not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it, but I thought maybe it's useful to see this kind of stuff so you understand some terminology, and if you're talking, you know, when you're trying to solve this problem, understanding some of the terminology and sort of how the thing works at a basic level does help. So we like to consider the problem solved by using a model we call the SDP, or the Service Delivery Pyramid, and that's kind of represented on the right-hand side of the screen. And basically, the idea is to break the problem into a number of layers, and you know, kind of delineate the sort of the reason for each layer. At the end of the day, we don't solve the problem until we complete all the layers of the pyramid. So, you know, having the first two layers of the first three layers doesn't do anybody any good. We need to get all the layers. As you progress up the pyramid, basically we have this issue of increasing investment of money and increasing effort and all that kind of stuff. But on the good side of it is that the more you spend your time working your way up the pyramid, the more you realize the benefits and the more you get the control of positioning the solution to what's solving your problem. So if we just kind of go through this real quick, at the very bottom of the pyramid is the blue layer, is what we call the network backbone. You'll hear the word transport, you'll hear the word backbone. Basically what we're talking about there is the connectivity between major centers or communities. So these days, fiber optic communications or fiber optic backbone is the way of doing this. It's the most scalable, the most capacity, that kind of thing. But you know, microwave radio is also an option. The next layer is what we call the point of presence, or the POP. Basically, that is a location within the community, and there may be more than one, where we can locate equipment and basically have the backbone infrastructure connect to. The next layer, the orange layer, is what we call the backbone transport, electronics, and external services. Basically, this is the layer where we place the electronic components inside the point of presence, or the POP, connect it to the backbone, and ultimately connect that community to other communities, and ultimately to the outside world or the global internet. Following up the pyramid, layer 4 is the local access infrastructure, or the last mile. You may hear the term last mile. That's what they're talking about. And basically, this is the infrastructure that is required to connect the point of presence to the subscriber's home or business. There's lots of choices here. You know, fiber is kind of the way to do it these days. It's the most scalable and it offers the most flexibility and capacity. But other options are wireless, fixed wireless, coaxial cable, like in the core of Fort Nelson. Northwest Tel uses coaxial cable, DSL. All these various terms are technologies that are all doing the same thing, and that is solving the local access or last mile problem. Next layer is what we call the local access electronics. These are the devices that are placed in the point of presence and at the subscriber's home or business, and they basically have the blinking lights that make the service work. And the final, or near the top of the pyramid, is what we call the operational and business support system. So this is all the computers and the processes and the procedures and the people and all that kind of stuff that is required to support and maintain and run the business. And at the very top of the pyramid, in the words you can't read because it's too small, is the customers. So none of this works unless we have all the layers, including the customer, and the customers obviously make the thing work and make it sustainable. So to kind of put a little bit of a picture to it, I don't know if you'll be able to see my mouse very well here, but basically the blue line through the middle that says backbone on it, it represents the backbone transport layer that we talked about, that being fiber or microwave radio. The green boxes represent the POPs that would be in the communities, and those POPs are connected together with that backbone. And then in the middle, off the middle green box, the fixed wireless local access or the wired local access are just two different ways of providing that local access, or the last mile component, one being wireless, one being wired, that being with fiber or coaxial cable or DSL. all of these have advantages and disadvantages, and as you go through the report, we've outlined a section in there that talks about all of this and hopefully outlined most of the advantages and disadvantages of each. All of this requires connectivity to the outside world, and so, basically at one or more of these locations, communities, we need connectivity to the outside world and to the global internet so that everybody can get to Google. Okay? So,
Okay.
vision and strategy. I'm going to hand it back to Kat, or Carrie Ann, for a couple of slides.
Sure. So just kind of talking about the vision that was created by the team.
Click through.
So as I mentioned previously, we worked off of the regional economic strategy work that you guys completed last year, made a logical leaping off point, and this slide just kind of demonstrates that the improved broadband connectivity is really the foundation for all of that work that you did last year in developing the economic strategy, which is listed at the top there, as well as developing the 3 developed themes arising out of that and the benefits that you expected to see from deploying that strategy from the regional economic perspective. So the work for the vision development was a remote session with me here in Invermere and the group of Northern Rockies connectivity team and key stakeholders up there. An extended afternoon of hard work, resulting in a statement that we have up on the screen there. Northern Rockies Regional Municipality is a vital, thriving, livable, and economically diverse BC region that is supported by widely accessible and affordable connectivity infrastructure and services. It actively participates in the global economy and provides access to services, information, markets, and opportunities on a level playing field with other less remote regions in BC and Canada. It is a sustainable community attracting residences and business to take advantage of the unique human, natural, and physical resources of the Northern Rockies. That is the vision of the future from a connectivity perspective. So we created a list of benefit statements that we agreed would come out of the region being a highly connected community. You'll see them there. If you can't read them because of the fonts, I think you'll find them on page 10 of the report. Ultimately, those themes really were about greater inclusion, greater public safety, higher quality of life, better access to education, access to business markets, expanding population, and greater access to services and information. So those were sort of the themes. I think that the COVID crisis that we're dealing with as a world right now has really identified that connectivity is a key piece in a situation like that. It makes access to information in real time available to people, and it also allows people all over the world to be working remotely rather than in the office. So I think that's a very live, sort of in the moment illustration of how very important we think this is. So Mike, I think that you can probably talk about the strategic objectives.
So as part of the visioning session, we saw the previous slides, the vision and the benefit, and at the end of the day, what was arrived at was a series of strategic objectives. There was 3 of them, and really what they, there's the exact words that we sort of put down on paper, but the basic theme is cost, connectivity to everybody, and trying to make this service as ubiquitous as possible across, as many communities in the Northern Rockies as we can. So the next step after the strategic objective, after we know where we're going, is how do we get there? And so we identified a number of initiative objectives, 1 through 4. On the very left-hand side, we'll start with that. That's initiative objective number 1. And really what we're saying there is the title of it is collaborate with the incumbent provider. And really the goal at the end of the day is to try to leverage the existing provider's infrastructure to obtain the improved service. The reality in your case is that Northwest Tel is the only terrestrial provider. Others have a challenge trying to get into that area. And ultimately, this is the lowest cost, lowest effort way to solve the problem. That said, I know you guys have been struggling with this for a while, and so I think we included here for completeness and as a sort of starting point to say, we need to sort of do our best to work on this objective because this is the most realistic way to solve this problem with the least effort and the least cost. Following on to the right, initiative number 2 is basically partner with the incumbent provider, and you may say, well, what's the difference? Really, well, the way we see it is that there's a bit of a difference in the sense that we still want to leverage the incumbent's infrastructure, but essentially we want to sort of get a little bit more involved, a little closer to it, act more as a partner, help steer the ship a little bit, and provide greater control and potentially get involved in the solutioning and contribute to the solution.
Can you hear me? Oh, when your phone gets tested, how's your dad feel?
Good.
Someone on the line, your mic is on.
Getting his meals?
Yep, just want to
Go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
Okay, to the right, initiative number 3. This is really encourage competitive providers. And while the other 2, we sort of said, let's work with the incumbent. Number 3 is let's try to actively get some competitive providers in. Ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever happens with getting a competitive provider in the area, it's got to make business sense. So really, this really requires some commitment by the Northern Rockies and ultimately the customers. They have to support that provider and essentially help make it viable. And we kind of considered IO number 1, 2, and 3 as what we call phase 1. And with the introduction of number 4 is what we call phase 2. And number 4 is really for the Northern Rockies to become what we call the provider of last resort. And that this is kind of okay, nothing else is working, so I guess we're going to have to take matters in our own hands and sort of do this ourselves. Obviously, that's a big decision that comes with a whole bunch of sort of other things that have to be considered, and it is the highest cost, highest effort sort of way forward, at least on the behalf of, or at least from the Northern Rockies perspective. So I expect that's why we broke it into phase 1 and phase 2, is because we expect that there is a fairly large decision point between number 3 and number 4. All of this, we say, makes up the strategy. So if I put this on a bit of a timeline, oops, sorry.
There you go.
Bit of a timeline. On the left-hand side, we really have today's state. We kind of just hope that it's all going to work out. All the way to the right-hand side, which is fine, I'll just do it myself. And somewhere in the middle is the right answer. And so basically what we're sort of suggesting here is, a number of parallel streams, starting with initiative number 1 through to initiative number 4, and kick them off as parallel activities and essentially try to work one. And if it's not making the progress we need, then we sort of move to the next phase, move to the next initiative, number 2, number 3, etc. So we put that sort of pieces into the pie. So basically, that's our process. Along the way, we need to have some checkpoints or decision points, and those are outlined in the yellow stars there. Basically, that's a point in time in which you say, are we making any progress? Is this thing going the way we want it to, and can we see the light at the end of the tunnel? If we're satisfied with the progress and we feel positive about it, perhaps we don't move on to to the next initiative. If not, then maybe the idea is to move on to the next initiative and sort of start taking actions to make that work. We've got a couple other things that are kind of hanging out there, and they're outlined in the kind of red or brown stars. And that is sort of emerging technologies and things that could change the way of doing this. So star number 1 there is, just over a year, there is some changes been announced to the wireless spectrum licensing. So that might change the landscape a little bit. Out, 2-ish years out is the emergence of 5G and widespread 5G connectivity, which can also make a big change in this. And a little further out is the introduction of low Earth orbit satellite, which promises higher capacity and lower latency, which makes satellite like a viable alternative.
More viable.
More viable, sorry. So if we want to put a few costs around this, just to understand the magnitude of costs we're talking about, what we did is we took the Northern Rockies area. I think Carrie-Anne alluded to this. We took the GIS data and we basically plotted it onto a series of maps to find areas of low, medium, and high density. We did this so that we could basically put a cost to it and come up with a high-level cost estimate. So if I kind of show the first slide here, this is what we call the base case. So on the right-hand side, it kind of shows that we've got all the communities, we've connected them together with this backbone fiber that we talked about earlier, and we basically run fiber to everybody's home. And if you do that, you're going to find that on the left-hand side, the pyramid kind of shows that, you're talking about a number between $60 and $70 million to do that. And an operational cost is sort of in the order of $2 million a year to do that, to connect what works out to be, a little over 2,100 subscribers, businesses and homes. It's a big number, and the primary reason for that is at the very bottom of that pyramid is that backbone infrastructure. I think it was, if I remember correctly, something like 400 kilometers of fiber that needs to get put down, or maybe it was more than that actually, to get connectivity outside the region. Remember, we have to get connectivity to the rest of the world in order to solve the problem. So that the backbone infrastructure represents about 3/4 or 75% of the cost. So that's obviously a big factor in this. We put this as the base case to sort of set the ground and sort of say, here's where we start. I'm not sure that's really realistic to have a $70 million price tag to overbuild something that already exists. So we kind of did something that we felt was a little more realistic, and that is basically we don't build the backbone. We leverage the backbone infrastructure that Northwestel already has and has already been built. So basically, if you look at that, then the capital cost comes down in the order of sort of $15 to $20 million, but there's obviously an incremental operational cost that goes along with this. So this is the kind of numbers and the kind of thing that a competitive provider has to sort of make sense of, and they have to sort of make these numbers make sense for them from a business perspective. If you look at that number on the capital cost, you say 17 million. Well, that's still pretty expensive, but 3/4 of that really is that local access piece. And there's options in there. We assumed in this that it was all fiber, but of course wireless and other options do exist, even though it's unlikely that anybody would deliberately put coaxial cable or DSL cable down now if it didn't already exist. They would probably just go to fiber. These costs, all the way, by the way, are, they're not based on actual quotes. They're kind of a rough order of magnitude that's consistent with the ask of the NDIT framework. So funding, how does it all get paid for?
Yeah, so funding. Some big numbers were thrown around, and so these are funding programs that we know about now. There may be others in the future, but these are the ones that are in play right now. CRTC funding through the Broadband project, Broadband Fund. That's a 5-year program, $750 million over that 5 years to increase network connectivity in rural and remote areas of Canada up to at a base level of 5010, and expanding LTE service along major Canadian highways. We're just about at the deadline for this year's intake, and so we expect the next intake to be in 2021. Our provincial counterpart funding arm is through Connecting BC. Phase 3 is now open, which gives you 50 cent dollars for similar kinds of builds as the Broadband Fund. It is administered by NDIT and available, obviously, to service providers, local governments, First Nations, nonprofits. And it closes, the current intake closes mid-June, and there hasn't been the next one announced yet. Last mile funding based on $250 per community, but there is a caveat that you can apply for higher funding in remote communities, which I think you certainly have some remote communities. Additionally, federal government funding is the Universal Broadband Fund is the most obvious fund. It is being redeveloped, the old program's being redeveloped as the Universal Broadband Fund, and it hasn't quite been announced yet. It's sort of widely expected to be announced in the next few months, but you know, everything's up in the air at this point in time. There's going to be a rejigging of priorities by the governments, and hard to know what's going to happen ultimately with that. Likewise, Pathways to Technology available to First Nations. It's managed by the All Nations Trust Company. And I raise that because you know, in putting together the plan for creating a connectivity project, if you can connect with other people who have access to pots of money that you don't, it can create a bigger win for more people with the same project. So it's worth considering. Gas tax fund, which you'll know about, available to municipalities, industry partners with capital, and some trusts that may have support mandate for either a northern community or the Northern Rockies itself, that kind of thing. So those are the immediately obvious funding options as we see them.
Okay, to kind of sum it up, so we kind of identified a number of next steps, and they're outlined in the report. But I kind of summarized them here, and we'll just kind of go through them quick. So in the short term, I think we need to work on that relationship with Northwestel, set some goals and deliverables, and sort of find a better way to try to move that along. Collaboration with Northwestel and the CRTC to remove the limits. And of course, in light of the current situation, there's been some rumblings about removing those limits, which is all very positive, I think. So, you know, it's entirely achievable. The one thing to be concerned about there, or be aware of, I guess, is that removing the limits increases the usage, and of course, there's always the potential that that creates new problems of capacity. Form a team to kind of stay close to this and sort of work on it, and start to sort of identify and complete some of those background actions that we identified in the report. Things like inventorying your assets and sort of figuring out what components of that pyramid the Northern Rockies can contribute perhaps to a competitive provider. So in the medium term, you know, understanding the assets and what is required helps, you know, sort of augment them, I guess, or contribute more to solving the problem. Articulate the Northern Rockies' role and willingness to move through to phase 2 if it should ever get there. Actively pursue competitive providers. There is other choices, not I won't say choices, but I'll say opportunities for discussion, I guess. And in the long term, ultimately define decision points to proceed to, ultimately a phase 2 sort of approach. And so that's kind of the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Souls.
I had a couple of things. First of all, I think one of our opportunities is along with all of the Yukon residents that are subject to the same restrictions that we have as far as usage goes or broadband use. I think that once it's removed, we better be leveraging really hard, working really hard to see it never comes back. I think this is a golden opportunity if they indeed do manage to give us unlimited access in the next while. Yeah, which did happen, right? Okay, that happened just now. So we need to really communicate that it needs to stay there. But secondly, one of the reasons that I say that is that I always ask the question, who benefits? Like, this is a good report that gives a good internal look, but who benefits from having the connectivity along the highway? And I think of that in a way, like personally we do, and each of our individual communities do, but so does the federal government, and so does the provincial government. And that just makes me go back to the beginning of why we have Northwest Tel here in the first place, and why it exists. And I think once you get that why, then you can also see strategy as to how to change it. And I think that why are we a part of British Columbia that has history? We have other systems that have shared costs, such as our gas system. We deal with Fortis, same as every other British Columbian, and we share the value and cost in that regard. During the installation, or when the installation of telephone became the most common thing in British Columbia, this area was so far out of reach from an infrastructure point of view that it was the reason the federal government had to provide the funding to create the infrastructure. And so it follows that we connected to the federal government funded systems of the north rather than the provincial system of our own province. That's how we came to have what we have right now. And so I think that it's instructive. That's instructive that it would be prudent for us to be continually lobbying for inclusion in the British Columbia system, and then use the high population numbers of our province as a way of cost setting for our region. So we're an outlying region. I get that. And I get that that leverage is hard to come by, but it's not unprecedented. It's being done in other service ways. So why not this service way? I look at that as a potential.
Any other questions?
I agree. And
Go ahead.
I said I agree with your statements, and we kind of glossed through some of the things that we kind of tried to summarize things in some of the things that we put in the report, but you hit on a couple of them. That is, lobbying at a provincial and federal level, but also taking a hard look at other initiatives that might be going on and trying to leverage them and basically solve them. Because at the end of the day, connectivity is really the foundation for a lot of initiatives, whether that's 911 or IoT devices and, weather cams and safety and all those kinds of things. A lot of that, if not all of it, requires some level of connectivity. And so you have to look at it from a problem of not trying to solve one silo. It needs to solve multiple problems, or it needs to be looked at from that perspective.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, councillors? Very well. Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the Northern Rockies Regional Council meeting. Moved by Councillor Souls, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Special Regional Council meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Valerie, can you, take back presenter so that we can?
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
I got it. Got it. It's just
Okay.
that the mouse is so slow on that.
Yeah, there's a bit of a lag there. Thanks.